Afternoon, guys. Had a few very interesting questions about some of my solo saws, and rather than just sending back some answers, I thought it might be nice actually just to bring out a few of the different models, even though they're all, on the face of it, they're all solo Rexes. Just how many differences that you can find in between exactly the same model just through a space of several years, and also presumably some which may have come from European deliverers and ended up in the UK, or have come from America and ended up then in Europe and then come to the UK. So they got a great history, solo saws. So Solo Rex, 125 cc's, big piston, 54mm piston, an impressive stroke as well, long stroke engine, which is why they're so great to use. So 54 piston, 54 stroke, and just like lots of saws, when you see in their variations, they have a slightly bigger brother. So in this instance, you have the Super Rex then, which almost looks identical, except for the fact it's a 58mm piston. Okay, there are other differences as well, but so when you look at these saws, they look really, really so similar. It's fast. So then, I was very fortunate to buy some spare saws the other day. Shout out Rich. And it highlighted, when I was taking apart a couple of the saws, it highlighted a couple of differences which are really, really unusual. So where shall we start? Okay then, so this saw then, Solo Rex, has, where should we start? So they're very interesting as well. So almost all the imports officially were done through, I think it was Minock Engineering. I can read it on that because they were in Maidstone in Kent. Yeah, they are, Minock Engineering. And so lots of the saws that came from Minock, what they did, what I believe they must have done, is they've unscrewed where all the model numbers were on the saws that came through them and put on their own Minock Engineering label. And so the model designation badges were typically either at the front, just next to the felling spike, just like you see on some of like the like on the Husky B65s or the 2085 or the 2100. You'll have the model designation badge next to the front handle, near the top of the front clutch cover. And then on some earlier models, the designation badge will be underneath the oil tank at the back of the chain and clutch cover. And then, so when you look at this girl, handle mounts, they look identical, except that on the slightly later version of the Rex, the front handlebar mount is actually cast into the engine side plate, and on the underside, instead of the handlebar going all the way through the aluminium guard and then bolting to the underside of the same clutch side engine casing, it actually stops here on the flywheel side. But if you look at an older variation, you'll see actually that the bracket for the handle bolts on, and the handle continues all the way through on the underside of the garden, just slightly different bracket arrangement. So that was one change. Then what they did, so model badges, different place. So here you see model designation badge is underneath the oil tank, and that's been replaced with Minock Engineering again. So the 2010 or model, the 6010, sorry, model designator badge has come off, and they've put their own badge in its place. So then there was a range change where they went from toggle switches to momentary switches, oil pump changed, rear air filter cover is different. So you see this is quite square on the later one. On the earlier model, they're rounded. And then of course, when you take off the air filter cover, the complete casting for the air filter and for the mounting is completely different, and a completely different orientation. I think far prettier on the earlier one as well. But pull start housing, the friction assembly, again very slightly different, tiny variation on the friction assembly, and fuel tanks remain the same, fuel pickup remain the same, felling spikes are the same, and there's some other really interesting distinctions as well. So some pre-production models of the Rex were sent out with an older version of the, so a 52C and a 62C, so you could pick them up in a 1/2 inch pitch, and the clutch sprocket would be just natural, just like a steel coloured clutch sprocket. And then, I wonder if this is visible on this one. Not quite visible. And then what happened was, when you had the early Rexes, the 7/16 pitch chain was sent out with a red sprocket, and the red sprocket, you could always know whether or not you had a 7/16 chain and sprocket setup, because obviously the stud and bar fitting is all exactly the same, or if you were running then a crossover which came later in the 60s to a 404, the sprockets were colour coordinated. So a blue sprocket is a 404 pitch, the bright red sprocket was a 7/16 pitch, so you would never have any confusion as to what bar or chain fitment you would have. And talked about the kill switches and toggle switches. Handlebar mounts, slight variation on the Tillotson carburettor, only tiny variation on the coil underneath the flywheel, and then on the flywheel cover. And in fairness, this is only the second one I've seen of this, but the first time I saw this variation, I thought, as my friend did, that I thought the mesh was missing from the pull start housing, because all of these saws have like a perforated stainless steel guard over the flywheel, and they're held in place in three spots, and they're riveted in place. But this girl, really unusually, has cast vanes all the way around, and you can still see the perfect solo red flywheel on the inside. So that's another variation which I hadn't known about until I'd tried to look to get the guard, and then I thought, wow, that is the design of this particular housing. So what that meant then in the end was, between the solo Rex and then its later sibling, the 125, I have 7 different variations now of that saw, with different sprocket and chain combos, different air filter, different momentary switch, kill switch, toggle switch. So, momentary, plastic toggle, and then on some of the other 125, so this is a Rex 125, they had metal toggle, and I have 2 different versions of the air filter housing, although there's actually a third one as well, which is a pre-production model, which was it looks like a casting which comes over the top, really, really beautiful. And strangely, there were several spark plug cap design changes as well, of which I have 3 now. So, absolute things of beauty. In this form can run, in the 125 can run anything from a I think the smallest bar I have is an 18. I think on paper it's a 17, but from an 18 up to a 30 inch, and the one and its bigger brother, so the Rex Super Rex, can run up to a 36 inch bar. So the biggest I've had with this is a 30 inch bar, and they seem spectacular. Let me show you what this girl runs like. Choke off. Hey guys, well, actually a ferocious engine. Just double check, I think I might add a fuel. The fuel tank is empty. Should have filled up beforehand. But just amazing, amazing running saw. So you think then started life in the late 50s. So 60 plus years old for some of the original ones. Oh, the other thing as well, which is interesting, is the variation on the handle wraps that Solo have gone through as well. I mean, perhaps all manufacturers do, but they went through from a very smooth finished handle. And this is gorgeous, this finish on this handle. Beautiful hard finished plastic, smooth finish handle, to a more rubberized handle, and then on a later one I have, almost looks a bit like some of the Husqvarna ones, almost looks like an industrial style heat shrink has been put on them. So there we go, hope that's interesting. So that's the spectacular Solo Rex, and if you get the chance to have one, they are just amazing tools to have and own, and just to have them hanging up in the workshop, they are an absolute item of beauty. Yeah, there we go. That's the Solo Rex. Also very interesting as well about the Super Rex is that model Super Rex saws would be stamped or designated, and so on a later saw, if you come across one and you have perhaps a later blue clutch sprocket in there, so you know it's 404, lots more of those were designated and sent out with the Super Rexes, just because of the age. They were later in the 60s, and so the only way to know would be to take off the covers, take off the exhaust, and put a depth gauge in there and just measure it from the outside of the inlet, and check whether or not you've got a 54 or a 58, because you could think you've got an ordinary Rex, and in fact you may have a Super Rex, so it definitely is worth checking. Alright guys, hope that's interesting. That's a few of my Solo Rexes, which so I currently have 12 I think now in various forms, and yeah, they're just a thing of beauty. Take care guys, bye for now.